Well, good afternoon. Good afternoon and welcome to another managing your small business now beyond the pandemic. So this is our 65th in the series that has been going on since March of 2020. Good afternoon. My name is Kelly Bearden. I'm the director of the CSU Bakersfield Small Business Development Center in Inyo and Mono counties, providing expert business consulting and also training resources, market research and analysis, and a lot of other services that are available to you free of charge. So today, our webinar today, we're going to go through a lot of the things on PPP forgiveness mostly. So apparently my PowerPoint has decided to freeze up because it does that stuff sometimes on Wednesday. So I'm going to change my share right here, and maybe that'll help it. So working right along, we got a lot of stuff to go over today. So we're going to be talking, a lot about PPP forgiveness, and we're going to be doing this, jumping into our PowerPoint that we used to explain for illustration purposes today, and jump into the PPP in that fashion. We're going to also look at a lot of websites today dealing with PPP and also the EIDL program and other things. So we'll see now if PowerPoint wants to work. And how about that? Just needed a little change of pace, like we all, don't we? So let's get going. As you know, at CSUB SBDC, we're part of America's Small Business Development Center program in all 50 states. In California, we're part of the Central California region, the region that includes the 14 center counties in the state that go from the Pacific Ocean to the state of Nevada, all the way down here from the southern part of Kern County up to the northern part of Mono County. So here we go. What's up today? It's June 9th, 2021, and reopening is continuing. It's great to see reopening continue. We're going to really get a big dose of it on Tuesday, our last webinar before California starts reopening on a statewide basis. And we'll be talking about that a little bit next week. So reopening continues. Hopefully your business is getting back to normal, starting to see more activity, starting to see more travel, starting to see a lot of things while the pandemic appears to be under control, or at least maintained in at least Kern County and throughout other parts of the state of California. So today our PPP focus moves from, we spent a long time, our focus really for a long time when we had rule changes in March of 2021 was to actually work with small non-props, or excuse me, but our focus was really the Schedule C businesses. And those Schedule C businesses were able to jump in until May the 27th and actually apply for a PPP. But now with the program closed, our focus is going to utilize the funds that you have received and also to seek forgiveness. Because it's great to get a forgivable loan like a PPP, but if you don't go through the forgiveness process, it's just a loan. And while it has good terms, a 5-year term at 1%, still, for most of you that I have talked to, really the goal of getting the PPP originally was to get it forgiven, and we're going to go through that a lot today. There's a lot of discussion still to talk about 2020 on forgiveness, and it's been in a wide pendulum swing over the last 15 months on the PPP, and the forgiveness has been the same. So we still have some pandemic relief programs that are open, and you can actually access them. A couple of them are the Shuttered Venue Operators Grant and also the EIDL, the Economic Injury Disaster Loan. Those SBA portals are open, and you can actually go in and to apply for new loans or new grants, as they turned out to be, for the SVOG. So at your new grant, a new loan, the restaurant revitalization is closed. That portal has shut down and is in the process of funding the awards. So what we're going to talk a little bit about the ERTC. So the ERTC had a question last week and wasn't sure on the answer, and the ERTC has been extended again for the second time, this time from not only the end of June, June 30th, but throughout the entire year. Now, the one thing is that we only have guidance from the IRS. So the IRS and the SBA collaborate on guidance for that particular program, and we do have guidance through June 30th. I'm a little reluctant without having a little bit more guidance on going the rest half of the year, but we're going to look into a trade association and what they're advising their members and kind of go over that in some detail. An excellent site from what I call the other NRA. So in addition, we are going to look at the EIDL loan reconsiderations and requests for funds. A couple months ago, EIDL announced that it was no longer going to be the 6-month program that it had hoped to be as the pandemic lingered and impacted businesses over a far greater span, approximately 15 months and counting. They're continuing to look at ways in order to actually expand, and a 6-month EIDL wasn't the answer. So the EIDL was expanded to 24 months, and you can get a loan consideration and get additional funds from the EIDL program. And we'll look at some of the EIDL numbers that we've really never taken the time to look at. We talked about the RRF being closed. The California vaccine lottery is going on. First winners announced last week, none from Kern County. So don't know why I even mentioned it. But we'll also take your questions. So if you have questions today, please go to our question and answer box. We'll have the chat where our producer, Maureen Busher-Dang, will be working the chat box today and be putting in valuable resources for you. The webinar today is being recorded, and we will send out that link in addition to our spreadsheet. So be expecting the later part of this week, some additional email from us that will have those resources available to you. So let's get on with the poll right now. And the poll kind of sticks with the theme that we're going to talk about today, and that is PPP forgiveness. And the first question is going to be for those of you that received a 2020 PPP. So if you received a 2020 PPP, what we're doing is we're looking for your status at this point, your loan status. So I have a 2020 PPP. My loan status is, my loan status is, first of all, it could be forgiven and approved by the SBA. So you're done with your 2020. Your forgiveness application is at your lender. And perhaps even you're starting your forgiveness application right now. And maybe your lender just now opened up and has began accepting apps. Or maybe your lender still is not accepting 2020 PPP forgiveness applications. So those are your 5 choices for those of you that actually received a 2020 version of the PPP, the program that ended back in August. So jump in and vote. It's ironic though, isn't it, that as we talked about 2020 version of PPP, it was more beneficial to actually procrastinate and be later to the party and getting it actually approved because of the expenditures that you could actually do. So you had the expenditures that you could take over a longer period of time. So kind of ironic, but that's the way it worked out. So we have 58% of you voting. We're going to end the poll right now and share the results. And almost half of you are done. You have your forgiveness application approved by the SBA. 21% of you are starting on your forgiveness application. Now about 18% has your application at the lender. So we'll go through those timelines about how long the lender can have and how much time it takes the SBA to approve. And then one of you just had your lender begin recently accepting the applications, while almost 10% of you still has a lender that does not accept applications. So thank you for your participation in that. And let's move on to the second poll question today. And we're along the same theme, but it's for if you received a 2020 PPP loan, either the first or second draw forgiveness applications. What we're hoping to find out is, when do you hope to have your completed forgiveness application for a 2021 PPP? That could have been the first draw, or could have been the second draw that was from January till May of this year. Do you hope to have it done by September? Do you hope to have it done by the end of the year, maybe sometime in 2020, or maybe as soon as possible? Get that thing wrapped up. I remember last year when we were asked a similar question to this, what we found is that with the process being the way the process was, it just took longer, and it took longer for lenders to get on board. And what we found is that it just took a lot longer than we had hoped. So let's end the poll with 43% of you voting and share the results with you. And it's a tie between 40% of you want ASAP, you want the forgiveness done as soon as possible, and also 40% of you want it done by the end of September. So, the end of September is basically the end of summer. It gives you summer to get it done. 4/5 of you want it done by the end of basically the summer. And then we have another 16% that are looking to have it done by the end of the year. And then sometime in 2024%. So thank you for participating in that poll. That is very helpful and actually is beneficial. So thank you for that. And we will move along. So, as we have been known to do the last several weeks, is just to provide kind of a one-page synopsis as we start out about the programs that are open, give you a status of the program, and give you kind of any action or key stimulus that you need to do on your part in order to access these particular stimulus programs. So as we know, the 2021 versions of PPP are now closed. That includes both the first draw and also the second draw. They're closed, and as you see, we continue to use this phrase spending plan. So if you have the money, you haven't spent it all yet. We're going to look at this a little later today on something either managing your PPP, fully utilizing your PPP in conjunction with other pandemic relief programs, or a spending plan, whatever I want to call it, I guess. So we'll look at that today, but coming up with the plan now that you have the funds, and then getting it forgiven. So that's true with both the PPPs, and we'll spend, as we mentioned, some time today discussing that. So we mentioned that the SVOG, the Shuttered Venue Operator Grant Program, is open. The SBA portal is open, and you can get into that portal and find out exactly if you can apply. There appears to be, it's kind of surprising, I think, from SBA standpoint, that of the 16 billion, the funds have lasted this long, and it could even go if that the funds don't even get completely utilized. So maybe that's a product of the program being a little more restrictive than we had kind of hoped, and a lot of rules and regulations, and it being along the lines of an actual SBA grant rather than what they were able to do with a lot of other programs, such as the Restaurant Revitalization Fund, and make it a little bit easier. The four page portal for the Restaurant Revitalization Fund, and 15 to 20 minutes that most people grant. Now, you've got to remember, you can't do both the Shuttered Venue Grant and the Restaurant Revitalization Fund, only one or the other. And of course, the Restaurant Revitalization Fund has closed, extraordinarily popular, was basically closed in the first 21 days that it was open to underserved and economically challenged individuals. So if you met those guidelines, you were able to get in. If not, probably weren't able to. If you were able to access, as we've talked in the past, the PPP first draw and the PPP second draw, since those were subtracted from the net proceeds of the RRF, then there was probably, in many cases, all businesses are different though, in many cases, there wasn't a lot left over. So hopefully if you were funded, and we have heard from quite a few individuals have received notice of award or actually been funded in the program, that you're coming up with a plan to spend the money, because remember, there are conditions to that. There are conditions on what you can spend that money for. And you're going to need to track that and to be able to show that those funds were not encumbered by another of our grant programs that we have. And we will look into that a little bit later on today with our illustrated use in the spreadsheet. The employee retention tax credit. This is the slide that you've been seeing. I left it up intentionally today because we do have guidance through 6/30. Now, the program was extended with the most recent stimulus program and is going to end now on 12/31/21. So it is open. It is still open for periods of 2020 that changed by law on 12/27, and also on 2021 changed again in March or April. So we'll be going till 12/31 on the employee retention tax credit, and we'll be showing ways of potentially using your spending plan or using your managing your grant spreadsheet or whatever means you use in order to actually utilize the employee retention tax credit to the best of its ability. It could be maybe a payroll report that you get, or a QuickBooks report if you use QuickBooks or some other accounting software. If you use a payroll service, or it could be actually reports that are generated from your tax or accounting professional. So a lot of different ways to do that. I'll give you an example of how I would do it based on just simple use of an Excel spreadsheet that you've seen, many of you have seen before. So the EIDL loan program, as we've mentioned, is open until December 31st, until the end of this year. We have not heard if there have been any run on the funds since they have been actually opened back up, and you're able to, if you received an EIDL loan, get a larger EIDL loan with the 24-month period. So the EIDL Advance is still open, and SBA is still emailing individuals, as is the EIDL Supplemental Advance, which came after that. Again, many restrictions apply to both of the EIDL Advance and also the EIDL Supplemental Grant. So we also have the California Relief Program closed. And again, there are specific uses on what that money can be spent for. So please look at your loan documents and look at the program information and make sure you allocate those amounts toward that. A lot of these programs are, I don't anticipate a lot of audits during these programs, particularly the smaller ones, but it's best now while the information is fresh and while you're actually using to make sure you have money available for things like for the employee retention tax credit. It's best to get all of these kind of situated if you have multiple grants that you have been able to access. Well, as I'm known to do, we have the family leave tax credit up here. It is open, and we will talk about that, and we'll talk about it very soon. I probably have said that before, but I really mean we are going to get into this thing and to look at it as some of these other programs continue to wind down, such as the City of Bakersfield Restart Loan to Grant program. It's open, but you heard a few weeks back that they have a significant amount of deals in the pipeline. And so we're saying it's open, but we'll see if the pipeline actually takes care of actually the entire deal flow that's available there. PPP forgiveness is open, at least for 2020. Remember, it's due 10 months from the end of your covered period. Depending on when you got your loan in 2020, you had a covered period that could have lasted from 8 or 24 weeks. We'll talk a little about that in a bit. Most people elected the 24 weeks because of the greater flexibility, the longer period of time in order to spend the money. And if they received owner compensation from that, it went from $15,385 to $20,833. And also PUA employment for contractors. And I'm hearing a lot of you talk about this. It is open until the 5th of September. Well, let's jump into some of the EIDL things that have changed and still let you know that EIDL is an actual program that we can jump into and we can utilize. So EIDL loans, again, as I've mentioned many times, are now a 24-month period. So you can take those expenditures over 24 months. Remember, EIDL funds are to be used for working capital. They're going to be used for notes payable. They're not to be used for equipment. They're not to be used for paying back taxes. They're not to be used for a number of sources. Economic entry disaster loans are for working capital needed to sustain that business during the disaster, to pay off any notes that were incurred before the disaster, to pay the interest and principal portions of that, and then also to handle the day-to-day expenses. So please remember what those funds are intended to be used for. But now this can be used and accessed over a 24-month period rather than a 6-month. We're seeing a lot of people go back and their reconsiderations oftentimes are 4 times larger than it would have been. So if you received an EIDL for $20,000 and you're saying, gee, I could have used a little bit more, a lot of people are getting an additional $60,000 up to make it $80,000. Every program has its underwriting criteria, or it has their rules and eligibility requirements. For EIDL, it is an underwritten loan with a credit score. The EIDL payment, if you already received your EIDL loan, it was deferred until next year. The interest does accrue, the interest at 3.75% on an annual basis and 2.75% for nonprofit businesses. The targeted EIDL, I might have called it the EIDL Advance last year, which was, of course, that is so 2020. That is so the 2020 EIDL. But the targeted EIDL that was targeted, and then the supplemental targeted EIDL, they were introduced earlier this year, kind of in the springtime. And they were also introduced to low income areas. And then plus you also had a requirement to meet as far as having reduced sales or reduced receipts. They had to be down 30% over an 8-week period of time. Mentioned the EIDL expenditure and the program extended until this year. So if you'd like to request an EIDL increase in your loan, remember this is paid back. So your EIDL increase would be, you would want to email the COVID EIDL increase request with an S, it's plural, at sba.gov. Then what you do is once you're given the opportunity, you can log into the SBA portal and actually go in and do the necessary things and supply the necessary paperwork that it's going to require to get you a larger EIDL amount. So you would go in and click the button for additional funds. If you have any ownership changes, you'll need to identify which tax filing you have based on your entity. If you're a corporation, an LLC, a partnership, or an individual, and then complete the 4506-T. And the 4506-T, I continue to hear from individuals that is creating a little bit of an issue that they are finding out because it is taking a considerable amount of time to get that actually fulfilled and provided to the SBA. And then you hit submit for consideration. And, you know, let's jump in and kind of look at some of the EIDL stuff that's going on right now. And, you know, let's go here. So this is going to be what we look at with the employee retention. We're not quite there yet. So let's go up here and actually jump into some of our PPP numbers where we wound up. PPP now has over 60% of the people that have applied for forgiveness. So we're pretty much online with that. But the breakdown with the PPP when it closed down, what we saw was we saw it considerably change towards smaller loan sizes and loan amounts. And that is particularly true when you jump into the new first draw loans that were able for individuals that were able to access it this year. Look at that average size, 18,000. Total second draw, 71,000. A lot of those were the NACE code that began with a 7.2, which entitled them to a larger second draw because they were deemed to be in an industry that had suffered greater than others. So just a little bit about the EIDL there, or excuse me, PPP. Presently at 277 billion. They had a total of 284 billion, and then we will continue to do that. So moving along, let's look at the EIDL, for example. We've never really looked at the EIDL, spent a large amount of time in there, but there have been nearly $3.8 million EIDL loans that have been approved to a total tune of about $210 billion. The average EIDL loan is in the low 50,000. So average EIDL, 50,000, that is going to probably increase as people seek a larger size. In California, you see here, we've had $36 billion, almost $37 billion of that $210 billion. And our average size is a little larger, pushing pretty close up into the high 60, low 70 range, compared to when you look at Florida, which has a lower size in maybe the 40s, so low to mid 40s. So we're seeing larger EIDLs in California, and that's going to continue as a trend as people access larger amounts of EIDL. So that's kind of what's going on with EIDL. There's more information here, but I want to jump into forgiveness and leave plenty of time for you. In addition to the regional, but then they also get into the targeted EIDL advance, and they start showing where those were distributed. Remember, targeted EIDL advance funded, there's over 140,000 of them. That is initiated by SBA based on your address. And if you are deemed to be your business in a low income area by SBA's standards, then you are able to then pursue an application. Again, you still got to apply and you still got to get it. So they've had about 1.1 billion that has been floated out in the targeted EIDL advance. Then we get into a little bit more from a regional basis, and we're starting to see numbers now on the supplemental targeted, which increased from 10,000 to 15,000, that targeted EIDL advance, of which they've now put out about $413 million with over 80,000 loans. So money's getting out there in those particular programs as well. Okay, so that's kind of what's going on there. And okay, so let's jump into start talking. Just briefly, we talked a lot about the shuttered venues. There's a little bit more information there, but let's jump into the PPP forgiveness. That's a big concern of a lot of people, so here we are. So here's our basic timeline for forgiveness. Usually most people, as we say, elected to use the covered period for 24 weeks. You have 24 weeks to use it. What's in 2021, if you actually, your covered period can be anywhere between 8 and 24 weeks. If you use your funds, let's say in the 10th week, you can actually elect it then by ending it then. It's still considered the 24 weeks to use the fund. It's still considered a 24-week covered period, but it's done after that. So you have a 10-month window from the end of your covered period to apply. So I guess if you would elect it after 10 weeks, it would start at that particular date. If you elected the full 24 weeks, which is 167 days from the day you received it, it would be that date. So then it goes to your lender where they have 60 days to verify your application, to check your numbers, and then upload it to the SBA forgiveness portal. And then SBA had, we've looked at kind of this right here, which is the very last day of 2020 that PPP loans were made, and that was August 7th. So on August the 7th, if you go out 167 days, you go into July. So you had 12 weeks to use it, but you had to use it by December 31st. So you had less than the 24 weeks if you got it later in 2020. So given that window, you have 10 months from the end of that. So you would have 10 months, which would be the end of October 31st, to apply for forgiveness. Now, many people got their loans a lot earlier, and so you're coming across this much sooner. It's getting to be a little bit more dicey on the timeline. And then you have 10, so till October 31st on this example. Then you have 60 days for your lender in order to verify your app, upload it to the SBA portal, and then the 90 days. So you very well could have a PPP going through the forgiveness process that began in 2020 and actually isn't fully done until the final decision until 2022. So again, once all the money is used, but again, that 10-month window from the last day of your covered period is very important. And now that we're into, the 6th month, starting to get closer. There's a lot of different documentation that we've talked about, but of course, if your loan is 150,000 and under, you do not have to supply that information, that documentation. Now, it's in your best interest to go ahead and actually pull it together because you never know if you would be audited. And you do need to have that. So you need the bank statements. You need to go through the process, even if your loan is under 150,000. And you don't have to provide it to your lender or the SBA. So some of those are going to be bank statement or third-party payroll service reports. It's going to be your tax returns. Basically your payroll tax returns, like your Form 941, your 940, or all your state returns. So state quarterly returns, which show individual wage detail and other things along those lines. A little too far there. So when we get into the forms, here's kind of an easy checklist on the 3 different forms that are available and the criteria for choosing the correct form. So the long form, as we call it, is your 35058. We're going to look at those in just a second before we jump into our example. And then we also have the 3508EZ. And the last form to come along was the 3508S. And you see the criteria for using that, different criteria. Generally, if you received a loan over $150,000, you are subjected to the 3508 form, which originally was a 13-page form, which is now down to 5. And the good news is it has the one form that has not been updated, and SBA said that they are looking for an easier forgiveness format for those that have PPP loans to forgive in excess of $150,000. So the most common one that we're seeing is the 3508 that covers 3508-S. That covers approximately 3/4 of the PPP loans because 75% of them were smaller than $150,000. And then there's those that are kind of in the middle with the 3508EZ. We have an example of that and we'll show it to you as well. So let's kind of jump and get into the actual PPP forgiveness aspect of this. And what we'll do is we'll jump into the first form, the 3508S. And the 3508S is, again, a form that was revised this year on January 19th, 2021. You'll see the expiration date up here, 9/30/2021. Doesn't mean yours is due by that date. So if you have a first or second draw from 2021, it is not due based on that expiration date. The OMBs, generally the Office of Budget Management, will oftentimes have a form with the date and then correct it. So please, at that top right corner, when you see that date, just kind of make sure when you use it, you have the most recent form. So the top part is pretty straightforward, where you just go with a lot of your contact information. Most of this information can be pulled off your PPP application. So, many of you went through that PPP application. You're going to have your loan number. Your lender has maybe a different loan number for it. You'll identify what your covered period is. Loans made before June 5th, 2020, you were given the option of an 8 or 24-week covered period. So obviously you're not going to elect an 8-week if you move 10 months forward and you're at that point right now for forgiveness. That 10-month date moving forward from the end of your covered period is vitally important for getting these things forgiven. So having that 24-week option is very important, even if that's the only reason you would elect the 24-week covered period. So, here is something that has confused a few people. It is the amount spent on payroll cost and the total amount of forgiven. So do put that information in there. You are not having to supply backup information for the payroll cost. I believe it's just there for statistical purposes. And then you need to make the following representations and certifications. You need to, or at least you or your authorized representative needs to initial these, and we won't go through them each individually, but again, it's basically that you're providing true and correct information and many things like that. And then you basically sign that, and that's the 3508C. The second page is demographic information. The one thing that you will, certify is that you had eligible uses of the PPP. You used them for the things that they were intended to be used for. They were used for payroll, the calculations and revenue reduction, and the calculations of the borrower requested loan forgiveness application. So that has been the easy way to do this. Now, again, since you don't have to supply the actual information, if your loan is, say, $100,000, do get that information together, because there will be audits, there will be program reviews. You will be asked to send this information, or some of you might be asked to send this information, and do it while the information is readily and it's fresh and it's available, rather than 2 years down the road to where you can't find it. The 3508EZ, this form was also revised on January 19th. And again, the same information at the top, but you will get into a little bit more information on your payroll cost and other information. What is new in 2021, that actually many of you that applied before 12/27, when the Economic Aid Act came out, 12/27/20, when more categories were created that could be used to spend your PPP funds, such as property damage costs that were uninsured costs that were caused by civil disturbance, covered supplier cost. And this covered supplier cost is, for me, I'm still having an issue with, and still would prefer guidance. I've heard that some of those needed to be essential cost. I've heard that they needed to be under contract before you receive the PPP. So just be running free-nilly with your supplier costs, like going back to our restaurant, maybe your meat supplier or your bread supplier or whatever. I just need more guidance on. Maybe your professional knows more on it than I do, but I would just like to see it explained, the covered supplier cost, a little better. But then we also had the covered worker protection expenditures. So pretty straightforward, your PPP, your plexiglass, making your customers safe, making your employees safe. Okay, I get that part of it. So those were the new ones that kind of came very, very, very late in the year, but basically, like everything else, applied throughout the process. And that's your EZ4. and you name certifications initial, but you're also subject to the safe harbor regulations that you brought back the same number of employees. You can actually use one of the safe harbor ones that we'll look at in a minute that says that basically because of COVID, you weren't able to bring your employees back, etc. So our last form is the 3506 that we're going to look at, and this is the regular, what we call the long form. As you see, the key thing here is this form has not been revised since June 16th, 2020. So that would have been after the PPP Flexibility Act of June 5th, 2020, when significant changes were made, including extended the covered period to 24 weeks and many others. So that right there is really kind of telling me if you have to use this form and report employee wages, they are looking at a way to really enhance and really kind of make the experience easier for everybody involved. And remember, there's the Schedule A, there's a Schedule A worksheet and a Schedule A that we thought everybody was going to have to go through last year. And there are safe harbor restrictions. Here's the key one right here, safe harbor right there, and check that box if you were unable to operate between February 15th, 2020 and the end of the covered period. And you can read all the rest of that based on it. If you meet that, you've met the actual full-time equivalent example, even if your loan was over $150,000. So this really is with the closure that we had starting in late November. We had two really significant closures to where businesses were shut down. And really this in California at least meets a lot of the requirements for a lot of businesses. Many essential businesses are going to need to look at that and have their professional, and always you have your professional look at all this stuff if you're so inclined. So that is that. Let's do a little bit of a reshare here and jump into a little thing that we've been doing a while called PPP by the numbers. And so with this is kind of my version of an illustrated example, my illustration on how Kelly Bearden would do this thing. So this is how I would do it based on a lot of the information that is provided to me. So, and again, you know, I don't have a payroll service and I don't have an accounting firm. I don't have an ACE, maybe tax preparer or something. So, you know, I do things my way, and my way is oftentimes using Excel. And so here we are. So as you recall, for those of you, and many of you have been on and seen this before, this is PPP 65 by the numbers. We'll send this out. Again, it's illustration points only, and you'll see why I really like this. But we still want you to know that the key to the forgiveness process goes through your lender. Your lender, and there's over 5,000 lenders. My best guess is I've talked with individuals that have PPP loans that have over 50 from 50 different lenders. There we go. So if 50 different lenders have 50 different processes, they have 50 different ways potentially on how they want to do it. So really go to your lender and go to them and go to their website and find out how your lender is going to handle this process. This process you do not go through SBA on this process. Your lender goes through SBA. So it's, again, your lender that is driving the process. So in the past, we've had three scenarios. We've had the infamous Kelly's Grill, which was an LLC that did the first PPP loan back on April the 20th in year 2000. And it's kind of stayed there. And as you just look at this is just kind of a hybrid profit and loss statement that flows into the PPP calculation on what loan amount you can get. And since it is a rather strict formula on how much money you could get from a PPP loan, and it is based on a couple of factors, on basically your payroll expenses, your self-employment income, and also any excluded payroll over $100,000. So those were the three big qualifiers. And in this example, we have an owner compensation of $120,000. It's an LLC, so he's essentially still paid as an employee of the business. That $20,000 is going to be excluded, as we show right here, which showed the net allowable payroll of $480,000 for the year. And since there were 12 periods, your average monthly period then is calculated at 40,000, and we were able to use 2.5 months, or 2.5 times that monthly average payroll, which gave us, in this example, $100,000. Okay. Now I want to show you two examples on how things could have been different. And this is going to be the same business that actually got a PPP on the last day of 2020 that you could, and then got another one on, I believe, March the 5th. Here it's the 15th, but we'll say March the 5th. So first of all, our first example here with this scenario is that they had revenues of $405,000 for the year 2019. They show their purchases here. Their payroll expenses were, actually showed somewhere else down here below. So their payroll expenses were not part of their cost of sales. And, in the food business, on P&Ls that I see, I don't know if there's a right or a wrong way. I see a lot of ways that are done both ways. I see them as a cost of sales, and I see them as under operating expenses. I would assume that there is definitely a right way, and maybe the right way is that those that really kind of create that sale, those payroll expenses, are shown under cost of sales, and maybe the rest of them are under operating expenses that are not a direct component of creating that sale. But I don't know. So I'll tell you, I don't know. So in this example, I do know I did it this way, to where I left the payroll expenses under operating expenses down below. So there's my gross profit, Then also we had operating expenses. I put in here depreciation for a very specific purpose that I'll talk to you about in a minute. And then also it came down to what was the net income of that business. And again, since there are book and tax differences, and the biggest one is depreciation. In this case, what I did was I looked at the profit and loss for this business, and what they did was, toward the end of the year, they have a very good tax person who wants to keep their taxes low, and they said, gee, you need a new delivery van for your business. You should go spend $30,000 on a van before the end of the year and reduce your taxable income. So, and since PPP is a derivative of your tax return, depreciation comes into play in this example. So the net income of that business was $25,000. They had 4 full-time employees, of which they earned $123,700. The average payroll for that was $10,308. And then using the multiplier of 2.5 times, they were able to actually come up with, $25,771 for the employee portion of their PPP. Now there's an owner salary component here, and they were able to actually pay themselves as well. And that, since it's separately on a Schedule C, was $5,376 last year, based on this 25,805. Okay, so the total amount of the PPP was 31,147. And I totally get you, those of you that are out there that said, my bank wouldn't let me do that last year. And several lenders did do that, and some of them were a little bit more progressive and did it this way, which was the allowable way. But with information coming in late, they said, no, we'll give it to you on your employees, but not on your actual salary itself. I know there was a lot of instances of that because I've talked to many of you. So what changed on March the 15th was that we started being able to take gross profit, which was line 7 on your Schedule C tax return instead of line 31, which is net profit. And that gross profit could go all the way up to $100,000, which created a larger amount of owner compensation. For the 24-week covered period, it's right here, $20,833, which then left that PPP second draw for $56,912. Now, I hear plenty of you out there too saying it wasn't fair that PPP opened in January and they changed the rules after I applied and I couldn't get that amount. And I was stuck with the amount of the previous calculation. I totally get that too. I just have never seen anything that procrastination created such a very valuable return on your PPP investment. But it happened, and it happened because we were all learning on the fly, and we were all fixing things that were wrong, and we had different leadership, etc. We also have something bigger in this example because we have the 3.5 multiplier because this was a NACE code 7200 business. So again, just to quickly look through mom and pop, and I'm going to show you where I got some of these numbers. And so what I did and calculated and how I would manage these funds moving forward. So there you go, the difference, 31,000 and 56,000. PPPs, the same numbers taken from 2019. And here's something, hey, it's our old cash flow forecast being reformatted for another use. And in this use, what it did was it took Mom and Pop's grill. We put Mom and Pop in Wasco, the city of roses, and actually showed in this example the actual results. Now, this format, as you know, I've pushed on you. I know I love my cash flow forecast form that is decades old, and it actually works good in order to put actual results in as well. And in this instance, what we did was Mom and Pop had 21,000 in the particular bank in January 2020, had a decent month of January, and you know, they went along their business really nicely all the way through the entire year. They were growing their business. They had $21,000 in cash and actually paid, look at right here, even though depreciation, it was actually a cash charge in this example, they could have actually borrowed that money and still showed the same amount and kept their own cash. To whereas at the end of the year, they were in basically the same cash position, but added that van. Okay, these were the actual results from 2019. And also over here, you could almost use this on their P&L. So there's their sales, few things are different. The cost of sales of the purchases, and there's their wages that are farther down. These are all operating expenses. And when you come right down to it, you come up with basically the same numbers, their net profit before that 30,000 was taken out for depreciation purposes. Okay, now let's use these same numbers moving forward. So we have 20,520 as the ending cash balance. So if we go to the top of the year, that was, let's go back, 20,520. We'll start off this first year at 20,520. Okay, so now we're getting into some color here, huh? We're getting into some examples of how I would manage my multiple pandemic relief funds. So, you know, not bad. January 31, better than the year before. February 2020, and then ouch, all of a sudden the pandemic hit. Had a good March going, best March ever. Basically shut down around the 20th and reflected shut down, had a few sales in April, very little in May. And then if you look throughout the year, I think this is kind of a situation that happened in a lot of businesses, maybe even worse here because their annual sales went from 405,000 down to 185, okay? And again, these are the actual results for this example. Now, one thing you are seeing here is that we have cash sales, but we also have loans and injections. And I can tell you right down here, looking at the color code, in March 31st, this business was one of the first to receive an EIDL loan. This 25,000 came from the Kern Recovers. They got their PPP, remember, in August of 2020. And also $5,000 there. Where'd that come from? Well, that came from the City of Wasco's fund. So what I have down here is the actual expenditures by month. And this kind of works as a good guideline. You might have to dig in some of the detail monthly to get the exact numbers. But what you can do is you can now start going in and looking, and you might have a profit and loss statement that you generate that has the same numbers. You might have something from your payroll service. This is just the way that I do it because you know I love my cash flow forecast. So going on down, what we see is we see here now with the pandemic relief, we have these particular programs, we have the dates they were received, and mom and pop did pretty well. For 20 and 21, they show that they received about $150,000. 2 PPPs, a California relief grant, an actual Kern Recovers loan in the City of Wasco, in addition to a little bitty EIDL. Okay, and maybe that EIDL included it doesn't look like it included an EIDL advance. So what I'm looking at here is I'm looking at my PPP that's basically a 24-week covered period. So I have a 24-week covered period, and if I received it on 8/8, I had to spend it by 12/31. So I've gone up here noticing that I need, for my PPP, I need $18,688 of PPP funds to meet my 60% requirement for full, absolutely full forgiveness. So up here under my gross wages in the month of August, and remember that on expenditures, they're either paid or incurred. So with an 8/8 date, I use the fact that they were incurred going back to the 1st of August in my example. And again, coming up here, you'll see that this is in August where I started claiming gross wages for PPP. I took wages in September, in October, in November, and December. And I also had a few payroll expenses that were eligible expenses here in November and December to get to my total. So it was a little bit of a stretch because I wasn't open much and my revenues were low. So I barely, or mom and pop barely made it. Okay, so that was the PPP, and I'm using the nice little yellow tint color there. Now, if I went to the first loan I had, it was the EIDL. And EIDL's good for a 24-month period. EIDL's going to be my catch-all for this 24 months if I am using this example. So what I needed to work on is I need to work on my shortest periods of time, which are going to be the City of Wasco, and I need to work on the Kern Recovers. So my Kern Recovers was for a 16-week period of time. And again, this loan started on 6/30. So I basically had July, August, and September to utilize those funds. So going up here in green, I'm a one month ahead of myself on my color coding, but I should be in July instead of June. That said, it was June 30th. So most of these were incurred before I received my loan. So it should have been the next month, slight little. But for illustrative purposes, it means the same. I went through here and I claimed wages in order to, right here, wages in order to meet my 1/3, because with the Kern Recoveries, it's 1/3. So here's my expenditures that I used meeting my 1/3 requirement for wages, which was $8,333. So in doing so, I would have probably reflected a little bit different here, but again, this is for illustrative purposes on how I would go about this. And I haven't even filled in the other colors. I could go in and fill in red, and I probably will in the ensuing months, fill in red right here for whenever I need it for Wasco, for whatever the conditions were there. I can get into the California Relief Grant, and then also PPP 2021. And my EIDL's going to be good until 2020, the end of March of 2023. So that brings me now into 2021. And I have actual results beginning here. Again, what I would want to do is I want to go back to 2020 and look at my cash period at the end of the year, because it's also going to be the same as my first day. So 24,847 to start off this 24,487. And I add my sources of revenue and my expenses. And so, but really look at the boom it's been for my cash position. If I go back, if I wouldn't have had these pandemic relief programs and started getting money put in, 16,000 here, 25 here, this business would have ran out of money substantially by the middle of these months. But by having those programs, it survived. And then in 2021, I have the actual here, and I can start applying my next pandemic programs that I need to account for expenses without double counting. So color coding shows me exactly where I've used it in my example. I know that, for example, PPP, I'm right here, and there's my 13,314. If I go down, I have this 20,833, which is for my self-employment income. So it's not really coming out of here. This owner did take an owner's withdrawal because that 2,200 a month in actual household expenditures, and they were going to continue to write themselves a check for 2,220. So, but you know, under the guise of the program, it doesn't matter that they were taking 2,220, which would have been less than this 2,083. This is the amount that they're entitled to. And so since 60% of their PPP, 56,912, I needed to come up with 13,314. And there it is right there, conveniently right there. Now, why is this important? Because we have the employee retention tax credit, and I am never, when you talk about tax credit, going to be able to get that right. The employee retention tax credit. And now these funds are available potentially for that, this blue, because I don't need to show any other revenue. I could show other expenditures to get to my 40%. If I can't get to my 40% with PPP, I'll need to use more of my wages. But by using my rent for the PPP and using other expenditures that are allowable, if I can get to that 40%, I could potentially use this for the employee retention tax credit. Just real quickly, an example that we had for 2020, we went into this and showed the spreadsheet and how we followed it and meticulously did this. This was our plan for forgiveness, and our actual forgiveness was right up here. Our covered period ended on 10/4, and we actually obtained 76% over the 60%. So we used more payroll and benefits than we needed. But then back then, you could not use the employee retention tax credit with PPP. So when I filed for forgiveness on 11/1, it didn't matter that I had used far more payroll. I mean, on my estimate, I was going to even use more, but I only ended up using 76% and then 24% of other cost. And using this particular spreadsheet, I have filed for forgiveness. My lender accepted it on November 20th, it was sent to SBA, and it was approved all before these changes, or it was sent to SBA before the changes. I cannot go back since I've already filed for forgiveness for my PPP 2020 loan. So can't go back and do that and change that, and that's how that changed. Here's a filled in example of the PPP-EZ. Kind of reflects the same thing, kind of shows that if your payroll was less, there were two big issues if the payroll was less. The biggest was you could not get your second draw. Didn't like that rule, did not like it at all. But I didn't meet 60% in these two examples, and that was a condition of getting a second draw loan, was being able to Spend your money and spend it within the proper allocations. Could have been closed down if you were a buffet restaurant, for example, or someone who just made it very difficult during the pandemic to be open. I don't think that was right. So those are some of the other examples down here that we'll get into. Obviously, I'm running long. That has happened before, really, when I get into this. But I really wanted to give you a really kind of current illustration and update on how this can actually be used for managing it and managing multiple grants across this. So with that, let's jump into the question and answers. Get your question and answers. I have to do my little stop share in order to get into the question box. And we will get there. Okay, applied for second round of EIDL on this first day because it wasn't available to me in April. The website shows pending. Any updates on when funding that second round? I would continue to contact your lender. There were a lot of people that have the codes. I'm assuming today that we showed there was still $7 billion worth of loans. I believe SBA reserved those that had potential error codes to try to fix. Your lender is your best way to continue. And I know some people have had a situation similar, and it has been very difficult to get in contact with your lender. But if you applied for the second round, the first day, then if you were eligible, likely what happened, we saw a lot of errors that were happening really early. For example, this suggests that there was a second draw for PPP. Or actually the question does say EIDL. So applied for second round. Okay, so you're applying for a reconsideration. So, but that question is kind of pertinent with the PPP as well, the second draw. There are people that are still out there that are hung up, and there's still money that's available to contact your lender. Now, if you applied for the second round of EIDL on the first day, which would have been not actually going through the application process, you would not apply, you would send an email to the email address that we showed you earlier. So then, then you would have been contacted by SBA, or you will be contacted. Obviously, with the EIDL program being substantially increased in individuals that had EIDLs, it's very likely they're still busy. So I'm assuming when you applied for the second round of EIDL, you applied for an EIDL increase. So you use the EIDL increase requests, SBA. There's also the 800 number, the toll-free number. And if you call the toll-free number of the disaster unit, if you're trying to reach EIDL, I would go that route. Okay, I received my first and only PPP on for 2021. Sole proprietor, use no Schedule C, no other employees. Don't know if I got 8 or 24. Can I make myself 1 or 2 draws in that first 8 week to use all the payroll? Well, you are able to use a 24-week covered period. You can elect, it's your election, to use 8 or 24. If you were lucky enough to have net income of $100,000 or more in your business, then the difference would be you received a PPP for either $15,385 or $20,833. If it's less, no big deal. I really don't think a lender is going to have any issues with that one way or another. I think what you do need to show is that the money was moved out. I would have done it on more of a regular basis, but you move the money out of a business account into your personal account. But it really shouldn't make any difference because that's what the money was for. It was for you as a self-employed individual to pay your salary. It was your Paycheck Protection Program. So shouldn't be an issue. I've heard some lenders come back that actually have had an issue with that, and I just don't understand why. Is there a list of companies that have been funded by either EIDL or PPP? There are things on the web. I don't have it handy, but that is public information. So there are a list of information out there. So if you've received a PPP or an EIDL, that information is available on websites. I just don't have that handy with me right now. How do you check and see if your PPP has been forgiven? The 60 days lender was up at the end of February. SBA's 90 was the end of May. I would definitely contact your lender. The lender still drives the PPP forgiveness. Make sure your lender got that information. So I would definitely go that route. And also the other thing I would do is if your covered period you selected was less than 24 weeks, that would extend it out after May. But really it's your lender that kind of guides that process. So I would really get a hold of my lender and get it done ASAP. Okay. For the 2021 ERTC, how do you maximize while also still qualifying for second draw forgiveness? Well, I think what you try to do is first of all, you want to get that forgiveness. And also with ERTC being extended later into the year, till 12/31, even though we don't have the final rules on that, we don't have the necessary guidance or the official guidance. What you do is you use whatever you can to maximize 60% of payroll if you can use 40% of other expenditures. And whereas we didn't go over the entire list, well, we kind of did. There's a number of expenditures that you can use, including rent and utilities, mortgage interest. You can also use some of that supplier expenditures, protection, like protecting your employees. So whatever if you can come up with 40% over the 24-week period, then you can utilize as little as 60% of your gross wages. And some of your other wages can be utilized for the ERTC. Is there a list of what you can use for the restaurant revitalization funds? And the answer is yes. There is a list. I have not yet seen any, there wouldn't be a promissory note like there is on the EIDL loan. So I don't know exactly the documentation that somebody gets when they've received one. I haven't seen that yet. It could be in there, but if you just go back to kind of the portal and then the program information, if you go back to the RRF portal through SBA, it should be available there. But they do have a number of uses of what it can be used for, and also the timeline for that, because most of these have a timeline as well. Okay, next question. Excited, I finally got approved for the PPP first round. Well, congratulations. Self-employed and had already given up. Well, you were one that probably got into that process to where you applied probably back in January or earlier, and it was kind of hung up. And we talked about that a lot in January, February, March, where there were a lot of people that were getting hung up and for a variety of different error codes. And when SBA shut off funding for this, they said that there's basically 8 to 10 billion in loans that have error code issues, and they're working to get those error codes and get that fixed through the system. So you're excited, and I'm excited for you. I'm barely starting to learn about the forgiveness process. Is there a spreadsheet website or something, that summary of things to do, timeline, etc.? Well, we will send out to you the recording of this. So you can reuse some of that information on that. There is a lot of information on forgiveness. I would start with your lender also. Your lender is generally going to show you information on that. We've done 65 of these webinars, or almost have completed 65 of them. And the process has changed so dramatically from the first time we started talking about forgiveness to where it's really only relevant starting probably the beginning of this year, or with changes that were made to the stimulus package on 12/27/2020. So there's a lot of resources out there. You can email me. We have consultants at the SBDC that can guide you through the forgiveness process as well. That's always an option for everybody out there. So please keep that in mind. That was the last of our questions. Going to the chat, I see some great resources that Maureen put in there, including the Restaurant Revitalization Fund website and information there, that it's going to probably answer a lot of those questions. So there's great information for all to be had. Okay, I think that's going to wrap it up. Sorry, ran long. Still can't get done on time. 1:16, darn. Okay, well, good luck, everybody, as you begin the forgiveness process. We will be back next week with webinar number 66. Big issue that you've had are employees. We're going to address that. We're also going to look at a little bit more at the employee retention tax credit and look at a few other things that are out there. And who knows what'll change by the time we get around to considering what we're going to do next week come Monday. So for our producer, Maureen Busher-Dang, I'm Kelly Bearden. Have a great day. Thank you so much for attending today, and we will talk to you soon. Bye-bye, everybody.